So one of the couple of questions that came up in the break that I'd like to answer before anything else, and that is, I mentioned it when we were having lunch here, that I have one of my favorite clients that I have is someone that lives in New Mexico, and when I see him, he makes this point of if he's with, this has happened more than once, that's why I say this, if he's with other people, and he sees me in public, he'll come running over to me with the people and say, I want you to meet Hakeem, he saved my life. And the reason I tell the story is because it's one that it really happened. And this is what the story was. I was in Arizona and I got a call from someone and they said, could you come and see this friend of ours, he's very ill. And so I went to the house, and the man he had a perforated ulcer, and he was bleeding internally, had black stool, and he was dying. He was going to bleed to death. And I said, this man must go to the hospital now. And they said, no, we don't believe in hospitals. We want to treat him naturally, so is there anything you can do? I said, now, get him to the hospital now. They refused. I had to leave, and I had to go out and find a phone booth and call an ambulance to save his life. So the point I'm making there, and the point I'm making is it was not, the only thing that I took in saving his life was not in knowing anything about natural medicine. It was realizing that this man was going to die if he didn't get attention, and that Allah's rahmah is in all things, including the antibiotic, including the emergency ward at the hospital, including the MD that has gone to medical school and so forth. And we must not shut that out. You know, what we have to do is we have to look at what is being given by the generosity of Allah in whatever context, and then use our intelligence and our sense and our own hikmah and wisdom to discern, you know, how that can be understood better, how that can be fit into a whole, how it may be wrong and why and which way, but we must take care about that. Like I said before, my friends who are in the mainstream medicine are more vociferous critics of their system than I am. I'm much gentler with it, in some ways. Okay? And I'll tell you, if you do not do that, Allah, and you're practicing medicine, Allah, if you're fortunate, will test you on that. You know, to see, okay, you know, don't be arrogant about what you know or don't know. You could hear. It will give you a hard lesson. Homeopathy and natural medicine can be as dangerous as any other medicine. James Tyler Kent, one of the great American homeopaths, said homeopathy can kill. And it can, as gentle as it may be in principle. So, you know, we have to, you know, practicing medicine is a big responsibility. And, you know, that's why traditionally this idea of idhn comes. In other words, you have the humility to practice medicine. And, you know, when I started studying early on and people started coming to me, the same sheikh that told me I should practice medicine one day came to me and said, you know, you should not practice medicine. And I said, oh, really? And he said, no. He said, look at something else. And I was shattered. I'd been studying all these things, learning all these things. I'd set my house up as a hospital for a period of time. I had literally, at a hepatitis epidemic in London, I had beds in my house and people were in there and I was treating them according to the earth, air, hot, cold, wet, and dry foods and doing all sorts of things. And, you know, but I said, okay, well, what am I going to do? So I, you know, several months passed and I decided to find a different career, and I decided I was going to go back into art, fine art, and I was going to make tiles, geometric patterned tiles, and I started working on developing the things. And the same sheikh came to me after I had done that, and I had the designs and everything, and said, okay, you can start again now. You know what I mean? And it was a little purification of saying, well, how attached are this to you? How much are you doing it for you know, some personal benefit and gain, and how much are you doing it as a real service? So, you know, there's a man who I remember he was learning homeopathy, and had this idea that he was going to heal everybody, and he had this great power and knowledge that he was going to dispense to everyone. And he seemed really disconnected, and we had a really serious talk one day about this very thing, about the responsibility of this. And he quit completely. I didn't realize in the conversation that it would sort of stir so much up in him, but it did. And he ended up not practicing medicine at all. He was going to study homeopathy and practice homeopathy. He left homeopathy and became someone that worked purely in the realm of education around it. Books and materials and remedies and all that sort of thing. And he's made his career on that, but not practicing medicine. So, we have to always sustain some degree of humility. And there's no knowledge that comes without it. There is no knowledge that comes without that. Because it's not, we are not the ones with knowledge. Allah is the one with knowledge. And knowing. So, okay. So I think, did that answer? I said that because in kind of answering one of the questions somebody had. Is that, okay. All right, so any other, yes?
Getting back to supplements, whether it be herbs or minerals, there are so many companies out there, within like Whole Foods or any health food store,
yes,
but also catalogs, online. How do you recommend any companies, or how can we, critically, analyze, are their sources pure, do they have fillers, pesticides, this and that, trust what they say, since there aren't any really guidelines that they have to follow.
So you all hear the question was, how do we make a judgment and make a discernment on the quality of, say, supplements and otherwise, I assume, huh?
I know homeopathic remedies are more
and homeopathic
controlled.
remedies. The homeopathic remedies, let me answer that first part really quick. The homeopathic remedies are pretty standardized, and at the moment, all of the major companies are, as far as I understand, are pretty well in terms of keeping to those standards. The standards have relaxed from the turn of the century, when the standards are much more rigid in terms of materials, in terms of environment for creating the remedies, et cetera, et cetera. The standards have relaxed dramatically, but for the people, there's a few pharmacies that are very trustworthy. Helios is one of the major ones. The one in Berkeley, what's the one in Berkeley called? Somebody? Berkeley? Do you remember the one in Berkeley? What is it called? Quinn. Hahnemann Pharmacy. And the man Quinn, what is his name in San Rafael? Do you know who I'm referring to? I'm sorry. International Foundation for Homeopathy is a good source for referencing that. Okay, International Foundation for Homeopathy, IFH. And there's the National Foundation for Homeopathy also, but I would put International Foundation a little bit higher. But Helios is someone you can refer to, a Hahnemann Clinic and the Hahnemann Pharmacy.
Laboratories.
Is it Hahnemann Laboratories?
I think so.
In Berkeley?
Is that the one in California?
In California, yeah. So those are all good people. But again, the last I checked, there were some homeopaths and some people who were pharmacists who investigated the standards in all of the places. And Standard, Boiron, Dolisos, all the major manufacturers were doing pretty good and good enough to stay up to standards, so they're trustworthy. Now, as far as supplements, as you were talking about supplements and foods, and there were some questions that came up, I remember this store that had organic foods, a restaurant that had organic foods in Boulder that used to have this menu with all these organic things, and they had nice things like falafel and things like that. And then one of the things they had on their menu was number 12 was vitamin pills on a lettuce leaf. And I thought that was pretty good. It was one of the meals they had. And actually, people used to go in and order it. And they weren't serious, but they gave it out. But generally speaking, I mean, and I may be at odds with some out there. You might give me some input on this, or you may give us some input on this too. My teachers have always encouraged to be inclined to go towards organic food for the source of nutrition rather than supplements. And for example, I've seen extraordinary things happen with brewer's yeast, nutritional yeast, very little bit in a day. For example, with type 2 diabetes, extraordinary things. I've seen absolute total reversals of neuropathies with 2 level teaspoons of brewer's yeast a day. And this is when I was in practice in California. And this was pretty consistent. But I didn't see the same thing happen with vitamin B supplements and so forth. So my teacher believed that, the organic sources of materials, you get all of these supportive, I think you kind of referred to that, you get supportive elements and supportive pieces that we may not be able to recognize. So I try to encourage people to get calcium from milk, from yogurt, to eat alfalfa, to eat greens that support calcium, rather than taking, and again, like I was saying, this idea that we're transmuting from one realm to another, removing materials from the animal and the vegetable kingdom into the human kingdom, and transmuting it, not just assimilating. There's a transmutation of kingdoms, of worlds, of realms that's going on. By that same token, the homeopaths have for years really been pretty much down on calcium supplement from a calcium carbonate source, for example, as opposed to calcium in milk or the new kinds of things, coral calcium and the organic sources of calcium that are closer to the animal human kingdom. Right? So in terms of quality of materials, I know there's good quality materials out there. And when it comes to herbs, my teacher, one of the things he emphasized, he said, was that unfortunately herbalism, for those of you who study herbalism, it's important to realize that while you can take a tack, like might happen in the naturopathic schools, in which all of the herbal usage is based on modern standards for scientific study, and that supports it. There's also traditions, but in those traditions also there is infection and the watering down of the traditions. So very much of the herbal medicine gets folkified. And what my teacher in Pakistan said, he said, is so often people use herbs and plants, which he considered the highest kind of medicine, but they use them in the wrong way. In other words, and he always pointed out that people would use a plant or an herb for something, typically use it for something, whereas it was actually really best for some other completely different thing. And one of the case in points in respect to that was the wonderful medicine that I grew up with as a child, which is Vicks. It's still great medicine. One of the great standard, Vicks, man. But you don't rub it on your chest. You don't put it on your lip to smell it. You don't put it in the vaporizer. Vicks, if you're in a third world country, use it on the infected wound on your foot or around your feet, where you're going to constantly get it reinfected, because it's such a great antiseptic and antibacterial, and it stays in place because it's in that petroleum jelly base and so forth. Or breathing it in, or olbas oil, to breathe it in and to use the fumes for it for dealing with bacterial possibilities in the chest, in the lungs. Or chamomile tea. And then the homeopaths point out and sort of demonstrate that chamomile tea, probably the most sedative aspect of chamomile tea is the pleasant taste and the social belief that it's calming. Right? I mean, naturopaths, is there anything in chamomile that actually is sedative and calmative, that actually does anything other than its pleasant flavor? Is there any drug effect that's actually calming? Yeah.
What?
From chamomile?
Sedative effect, but it also...
What's the chemical? But does this have actual chemical sedative effect? I mean, is it identifiable? I don't think it does.
Chamomile as a whole, it is separated all the... Chamomile.
So there's studies with chamomile as a whole. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess in some of the old books you'll see that chamomile, in the homeopathic, maybe this is, if it works, maybe because it's homeopathic that it works. So the point I'm making is that my teacher taught the use of chamomile tea as an anti-inflammant, as an antibacterial. So it was one of the great eye washes. So it's not a tea, and many people find that if they give chamomile tea in its gross form to children, it can actually be, personally, if I drink chamomile tea, my stomach just goes into chaos. Because there are oils that have been identified chemically as being irritant in chamomile as well. So anyway, the point I'm making is that when it comes to herbs and these things, that there's a degree of it becoming folkified. That is, it becoming popularly understood to do something, and it may be otherwise. Or it may be that it's effective only because it's commonly understood to do so, right? This brings up a point about homeopathy. Is there anybody, how many of you understand the principles of homeopathy?
I don't.
How many do not understand the principles of homeopathy? Okay. Well, this is, if you're studying, I would suggest in my book list I give some things on, some references to books on homeopathy. Homeopathy is one of the primary methods I've used for therapy through the years, and mostly because I see it works. And like I said yesterday, the first encounter I had with medicine that really worked for my asthma was my first teacher who cured my asthma with one remedy, one homeopathic remedy. I'd had all my life, and he gave me one homeopathic remedy, and that was it. And I was pretty impressed. But I began to study with him, and from that time on, I've seen the efficacy of homeopathy, and I've taught it, and I've encouraged people to learn homeopathy. Early on when I was studying, and as I mentioned, I made dua often for Allah to show me the meaning of things. I made dua to Allah. I said, Allah, what is homeopathy about in this perspective of Islamic medicine, in the perspective of hot, cold, wet, and dry? And what came to me that it is one of the rahmas of Allah, and it is a hikmah for our age. So, you know, and then as I began to study, I discovered that Hahnemann, who developed the science of homeopathy, he said in his own writings, he said, and this is back to what my teacher said about the connection with Rahma, Hahnemann said, I discovered homeopathy because he said, I sought out homeopathy, and I looked and I searched and I studied to find homeopathy because I believed in the mercy of God. Literally, specifically, he said, because I believed in the Rahmah. I mean, that's very specific. So that's how he came to homeopathy, because he believed in the mercy of it. But what he discovered and what he demonstrated and what he began to work with was the principle of homeopathy, which is, it comes from the word homeopathy, similar, homeopathy, suffering, feeling, pathos. So in homeopathy, you give a medicine that can cause the very symptoms that you're intending to treat. So the reason I bring this up too is that chamomile tea is used as the antidote for excessive coffee drinking. Because the symptoms of chamomile tea, according to the homeopaths and provings, most similarly match the symptoms of coffee and caffeine poisoning. Okay, are you with me on that? Does that surprise anybody? Well, maybe some frowns. Maybe it doesn't make sense to some of you, but pardon me? No, the effects, not the signature, the results. So the homeopaths, the way Hahnemann studied and worked with homeopathy, it's the same way when we say a food is hot, cold, wet, or dry in the Unani Islamic tradition, we say it's hot, cold, or wet, or dry because of the effect it has on a person. Something is hot and it's defined in degrees. Something is hot on the first degree, second degree, or third degree, or fourth degree. It's cold in the first, second, third, or fourth degree. It's hot, cold, wet, or dry in the first degree if, after using it frequently, it will affect the human body in that way and create either heat, coldness, dryness, or wetness. In the second degree, if it will do it more immediately without repeated using it. In the third degree, if it's immediate and it affects function that in turn can bring about, like diuretic. It affects function that it can in turn bring about one of those aspects of hot, cold, wet, or dry. In the fourth degree, if it immediately brings that about, if it affects function, and there's some element of destructiveness where it may destroy tissue and be harmful, like a poison in the fourth degree. So it's a question of degrees. But those have been done and arrived at by the effects they have on people. Now, homeopathy worked the same. Hahnemann did the same thing with developing his homeopathic remedies, he gave these remedies to himself and to his colleagues. They took substances and they observed the effects that these substances had on the people that took them. This is the way Hahnemann arrived at the basic homeopathic principles. He started by taking the bark of quinine. He said, but he didn't intend, what came out was not his original intention. His intention was to understand why quinine should be such a well-established remedy for malaria. So he began taking quinine daily to see what does it do to me so I can understand it as a substance, and maybe have some insight in why it should be a medicine by understanding what it is, but understanding it experientially as to what it is by taking it. So he began taking it every day, and after a period of time, began to develop the symptoms of malaria. And then he went back historically and saw that Hippocrates, Ibn Sina, many of the traditional physicians spoke of the two possible actions of medications. One allopathic, and one way of treatment in which if a person has a fever, you give them something that will calm and cool the fever. Cucumbers to cool fever. Cold and wet. Allopathic. Allo meaning other than. Most modern medicine is allopathic. You give the opposite. You do something to counteract the symptoms. If there's fever, you do something to stop the fever. In homeopathy, if there's fever, you give the person something that actually would cause fever, and the response will be a curative response in which the system itself can overcome the fever. Okay? Is that confusing? Yes? Okay. Pardon me? Okay, let me say it again. So, let me go a little bit further with Hahnemann, the picture of Hahnemann's experience. He discovered that by taking quinine, which was the common cure for malaria, he discovered that he had symptoms. And then he found in history that many people believed in giving a substance that would cause symptoms, the same substance, to the person that had the symptoms, and to stimulate their body to deal with the symptoms. That was a historical fact. Then he began discovering examples of homeopathy historically, in other words, of this principle working. And then he and his colleagues, over a long period of time, I think it was 12 years before he actually published his findings of his studies, he and his colleagues began taking substances daily, including poisons, all sorts of traditionally used medications, and keeping very detailed notes of mental, emotional, and physical symptoms, which immediately started defining it and describing it within the context of what we would call holistic. That is, emotional, mental, and physical symptoms, all included. Very subjective symptoms. Are you with me on that? So they started taking them. We could take any substance here as a group, and everybody start taking a little bit every day and keep notes, and then share and compare the notes and see if we all had some things that came up that we could call symptoms in common. And if we did, that would be considered approving in homeopathy and by homeopathic principles. And we in principle could take that substance and use it when we find those symptoms that we all found in common. Okay? So in homeopathy, the homeopath, anything, here's the law that he came up with. Anything that can cause a particular set of symptoms, any substance that can cause a particular set of symptoms is capable of curing those same symptoms in a sick person. Belladonna, the plant, causes fever, hotness, dryness, in extreme hallucinations, dilated pupils, sensitivity to light, right? Fever. Belladonna can be used to cure those in a person, or belladonna can be given to the person that has those symptoms, and the taking of that substance will stimulate a response that's curative. Okay? So it's pretty strange, and it goes against a lot of the principles and understanding, the natural understanding we have, that kind of a logic in a certain sense that we have. But it does work, which is extraordinary. I mean, the material in homeopathy that is established, the studies and the case studies and the history of it is enormous. And the history of it within a scientific parameters is pretty good size. Clinical evidence of it working is enormous. So here's the thing we're working with. We're working with this idea. Let me repeat it. Any substance that can cause a particular set of symptoms is capable of curing those same symptoms in a sick person. Okay, is that all clear to everybody? Any substance that can cause a particular set of symptoms is capable of curing those same symptoms in a sick person. This is a deep hikmah. There's a wisdom in this. And the wisdom is based one of the foundations for this wisdom is based on recognizing that the body is this extraordinary system that manages balance and homeostasis. So, meaning that the body, when it takes coffee, and there's another principle I want to bring in here. Our pharmacist is not here anymore. But in pharmacy, they used to teach it, and I'm not sure they still do teach it because now they're so disconnected from these kind of principles. But they used to teach in pharmacy that there was a law, I forgot the name of the person that described it, but it takes on the person's name, and that is the inverse action of drug action. And that is, there's a primary action of a drug and a secondary action. And the primary action and the secondary action of a drug inclines to be the inverse of the primary action because the body reacts and responds to it, similar to even related somewhat to what you described with the ascorbic acid rebound, right? So, are you with me? The primary action, the secondary action. So coffee, tea, any stimulant. You start drinking coffee every day and boom, you get wired, right? Heartbeat, bump, 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 sweat, speech, etc., right? Right, wired. It amps you up. Now what happens? It increases urination, increases perspiration. Yes? Coffee is also very good medicine. It can increase, it can be a purgative. I mean, you can take coffee. I've often given coffee to people with diarrhea. And if you have nothing else handy, it's a great remedy. Because it just pushes everything out and that's it. I've seen it work many, many, many times. Strong coffee, okay? But all that happens, yes? Elimination, right? Sweat, perspiration, urination, faster, everything going faster, burning up fuel, right? So what happens with the body, if you start taking that every day as a stimulant, the body in its wisdom, and another book I have mentioned in my book list is a book called The Wisdom of the Body by Walter Cannon. It's a classic. It used to be one of these, must-reads in medical school. It was one of those things. But he's the one that established and he was the one that coined the term homeostasis. The word homeostasis came from him. And that is the concept of the principle of self-balancing. The body's ability to achieve balance and sustain it. In that book, he talks about how all death is really irreversible shock in a particular direction in the body. It's not really dehydration. It's not really this disease or that disease. The final thing that happens is that the body goes into a state of shock in which it finally goes out of balance in terms of the earth, air, fire, water until it cannot sustain the necessary pieces that are needed for it to be in that place called life and to contain it. So in the body's ability to achieve and maintain homeostasis is remarkable. Like I said, when we eat, the force of that eating is the intensity of that combustion is so great. Our cooling systems must be able to manage that. One of the most serious, and one of the things he points out in that book is one of the most serious affronts to our well-being is not the loss of blood, but the loss of fluid. And how we can have an arm cut or a leg cut, huge amount of our being, and survive when we actually have fluid loss. It doesn't take very much, percentage-wise, until we get to a point of danger. Right? Right? So, from this wisdom of the homeostasis, we start taking coffee, and the body's wisdom then says, okay, here's the stimulant coming in, more urination, so I have to, what? So much urine has been lost, so much, the body does this all, so much urine has been lost, feces have gone through that rapidly, sweat, working at this kind of speed of action, this much heat's being produced. So it takes an account and it says, okay, wait a minute. If this happens every day, the body's wisdom is saying this, if this happens every day, 3-4 days, I'm going to just dry up. My kidneys will stop working. So et cetera, et cetera. I can't do this. Okay, so we've got to balance the budget. Okay, let's hold the feces a little bit longer. Let's slow down the lymphatic flow. Let's balance the economy so we can survive. And that balancing of the economy will be the secondary action of that drug. So coffee in its initial action is stimulant, but the body reacts with its wisdom to turn coffee and to create depression, to manage it. So the primary action of coffee is stimulant. The secondary action of coffee is depressant. This is true for all drugs. The depressant drugs have the ability, the body has the ability to respond to depressant drugs with stimulation. I have seen heroin addicts shoot up heroin and boom, wired like they were on cocaine. Seriously. And how many people do you know, or how many of you personally know that if you drink strong coffee, you're ready to fall asleep right after drinking it? Yes? So most people drink coffee, and if they drink it chronically and regularly, or tea or any stimulant, it operates as a depressant in the long view, in the general view of what it does to their body, and they need the coffee to get them and move them up somewhere towards normal. But on the whole, they will be depressed. There is no shortcut to energy. You know, and then there's people say, well, I take ginseng to get a lot of, I take cayenne, all this, natural ways of having stimulants. No, you're stimulated, again, this is the same principle. Health has to do with wholeness. And everything has to play into it. There's no shortcut to it. So that's just the homeopathic principle. And it's something to realize about stimulants and about anything that the primary action, secondary action, okay? And it's something to recognize. I remember when I was, when I started this clinic in California, in Santa Barbara, we had our clinic, and there was a man who was an herbalist who came to be part of the clinic. And he said, yeah, I'm so happy to be working with you. He says, this is exciting. This is going to be a great clinic. He was the herbalist, and we had an MD, and there was myself doing homeopathy and just whatever else I do. And he said, and also, actually, I would like to consult with you about some things. I have this, I have a few problems, health problems too. And he said, one of the things, I have this chronic yellow mucus in the back of my nose and so forth. And he said, and I don't understand why. He said, I do this and do this. And one of the things he did is he took huge amounts of cayenne daily, but he also took, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of it. The yellow, no, golden seal. Who said that? He just taking golden seal capsules like by the dozens all day, every day. And I said, if you take golden seal, according to the homeopaths, if you keep taking golden seal, yeah, it's going to do that. Or another example was someone who was into natural medicine that came to me and said, I want some counsel on my health, but I should be in good health. I take, every morning I drink ginger tea, and I take so many capsules of cayenne. And it was some huge amount of cayenne, with this idea that cayenne is like really going to make him strong and healthy, probably because it was hot, And I said, oh my God, you take that? And his wife said, yeah, I do too. And I was amazed how much cayenne they were taking. Now in the homeopathic provings, in the homeopathic picture of cayenne, not only can it cause certain physiological things, but emotionally it can cause homesickness. And I said to them, I said, oh, you guys aren't terribly homesick or anything, are you, by any chance? I said it kind of jokingly, and they both stopped and they looked at each other and said, how did you know? So, I suggest to anybody who's involved in herbal medicine that they take a look into the principles of homeopathy to give an extra spin and an understanding on the use of herbs, medications in general, and healing principles in general. Yeah.
Supplements. I mean, for one thing, supplement industry is a multi-million-dollar industry in America, and there are certain regulations. For the most part, they aren't regulated by, like, for example, the FDA. And because of that, you can just go to Whole Foods, you can go to Rite Aid, and just pick up whatever you want. But keep in mind that, herbs, a lot of these high-potency vitamins, they are medicine, and you should treat it as such. Just to go in without, just reading a book, or you read in the newspaper that such and such is good for whatever, is really not a safe way to approach these things. There's a reason why people spend years studying herbs, vitamins. That's why we have herbalists, that's why we have homeopaths, that's why we have naturopaths who study this, and they are doctors and they're trained in how to dispense them. So if that is something that you are interested in doing, then you should study it. But I really caution you to be careful when you just want to treat something naturally by just going and buying something over the counter like that, because you could do some harm without realizing it. And a lot of, because they're also not regulated, you don't know if there's any contamination in some of the herbs. Sometimes they're not processed properly, especially when it comes to children too, because you want to be careful of that. But that's just my two cents.
And identifying, like one of your questions, identifying a good source for the herbal product is pretty important too. I mean, I know we used to make, when I had the clinic in Santa Barbara, we used to make a lot of our own medicines. So we could, we knew what we were using. Like Passiflora is one of my favorite things to use in material form, herbally, you could say, Passiflora flowers. But we always used the flowers. And nowadays you go into an herb store if you want it, and Passiflora works wonderfully if it's made properly from the flowers. But you go to nowadays the standards are means if it's a Passiflora extract or tincture, or it can be dried Passiflora in capsules in which the drying you've lost all the real benefit and the life of it. Or it's mostly from the leaf. The leaf has a different effect than the flower, and so the standards are very weak and very poor. And like you say, there is not a standard. So you really have to depend on the ethics and the kind of insight of the people who are doing the medicines and the remedies. And what I want to bring back I don't know if I've told you this already. I lament the loss of the art of pharmacy. The art of pharmacy is lost. You find some of it in Pakistan, India, Iran, Afghanistan, Kashmir, some of these places still alive. But the modern art of pharmacy in this part of the world is gone. And it used to be, and now a lot of people are taking on the, learning herbs and plants, but even that's limited in terms of what they've learned how to do. It used to be there were all these kinds of preparations and all of these ways and understandings of how percolation works and how you extract the most volatile, the most useful parts of the plants, what it means to dry something, what it means to use something that's, whether you make something into a vinegar, whether you take the water of something by distillation, whether you take the attar from it and use that, and all sorts of other preparations. There are hundreds of preparations were used in books on herbal medicine that you would get 100 years ago. The details of the standards and the recognition of the standards to identify the quality were very, very high and very, very extraordinary. I have fortunate to have a lot of books on these, and these are huge dispensatories and pharmacopoeias. And pharmacognosy was a science that applied to herbs and plants. Pharmacognosy now, that is the recognition and the knowledge and recognition of pharmaceuticals, it's gone into diagrams and charts and medicines and big corporations that are, it's all chemical. So what I'm saying is there's a big gap there. It's starting to come back, yes? Yes? It's starting to come back. You say yes. It's starting to come back in the naturopathic realm and the complementary medicine where people are beginning to look at them, with some more scientific standards and studies and so forth. It's starting to come back somewhat. But in terms of it moving over into an art of pharmacy where beautiful preparations are made, I don't know. That's a long ways away. Yeah.
What are the economics of traditional medicine now? For example, in the Muslim countries where it's actually practiced, is the average person actually able to buy these drugs?
Is it what?
Is the average person in these Muslim countries where there's traditional medicine?
Well, the only place there's traditional, again, when you say traditional medicine, it really doesn't exist most places except in Pakistan, in the places I just mentioned. Unani medicine exists along with Ayurvedic medicine in India, right? Those are traditional. In China, there's a whole different story that happens in China, and that's been revived with the Cultural Revolution, and apparently somewhat watered down with the revival of it as well, but they're regaining it a lot. That's a traditional medicine. In Pakistan, Iran, some in Afghanistan, traditional medicines are available. But again, they've been watered down by manufacture by large companies. Hamdard manufactures, they're easily available. And so that's a traditional medicine. In terms of alternative medicine, in this country, part of what's happened in this country is alternative medicine has been increasing in terms of economic reality, right? Through the years, these past few years. Organic foods, all these things are shooting up. The amount of money people are spending on alternative medicine and over-the-counter herbal medications and so forth, it's gotten to be enormous. And that's why you go to Santa Fe, and people expect that. Or you go to Santa Fe and most MDs start using herbal things, even if they don't believe it does anything, along with our antibiotics, because people expect it, because they're, enlightened people that believe in, or they'll learn homeopathy or take a class or prescribe homeopathic remedies and not really have knowledge of homeopathy. But so that's changing here. But the economics, homeopathy is an extraordinary medicine because it costs virtually nothing to make homeopathic remedies. To package them, to manufacture and market them, and it costs a certain amount. But to make the actual medication itself, because homeopathy is made with such small quantities and they're diluted. So actually one bottle of, if I had one bottle of aconite with 10 drops of aconite in it, if I go into this, we'll go into a long discussion. But one drop, I could medicate you and all of your grandchildren forever with that, from that one bottle, because we dilute and we add it to water, and we dilute and we add it to water, and we dilute and we add it to water, and so forth. And that's one of the rahmas, one of the mercies of it as a medicine. And it still seems to work, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
I want to make a point to kind of talk about his point. In Pakistan, whenever I go, a friend of mine who not a lot of people here knows would say, go to this homeopathic store and buy me R6, R20, this one, that one. And he is very, I guess, into that. And that now, from what you just said, I understand that dates back to Hahnemann. And those R20s or those R6 or, excuse my ignorance, those are all, I think, made in Germany or somewhere. And then you have in Pakistan, and there's stores on every corner that sell those. And then you have stores that sell traditional herbal medicine. And it seems like what you're saying is that those clear bottles of R6 come from the herbal medicine through his studies. And so are kind of, is there a relationship?
Okay, homeopathy as such was a science and an art that was developed and began in about 1812, Hahnemann, Austrian man, published the first book on homeopathy, the Organon of medicine. And that's when it began in its modern form. Hippocrates recognized the principles, Ibn Sina described the principles. Many traditional physicians in the old schools, traditional schools, recognized and articulated the principles of it. He took the principles and ran with it and developed it as a medicine that could be used. And so that science really began a little over 250 years ago, up until the present time. So in that medicine, they use a lot of traditional herbs, plants, but they use all kinds of odd things like horse sweat. You know, they use all sorts of very odd things. And part of the mercy is the recognition in Allah's creation are all of these extraordinary things that have credible properties for healing. That's part of the awesome proof of homeopathy in a certain sense. So you find those in those countries. Homeopathy is very big in India, Pakistan. Many people say it's big there because those people traditionally can recognize or have been able to recognize and hold to the idea that subtle things have a reality. And that in places like this country, what happened is homeopathy was growing and was becoming the new, what was called the new school of medicine, and at the turn of the century was like taking over the country in terms of medication. Any of you from San Francisco? You know San Francisco? You know the UCLA hospital in over there in San Francisco? What do they call it? You know that main hospital? Yeah, UCSF. That hospital. That was a Hanuman. That was a totally homeopathic school at one point historically, at the turn of the century. And the entire faculty and student body did provings of remedies at around 1900. And they have in the basement of their library sort of stacked away all of the journals from the 1800s, which are incredibly rich with studies and case studies and so forth of homeopathic cases, et cetera, et cetera. Yes?
I'm praying to Allah that I have humility because I'm still searching to find cures for my own community, and that's African American Muslim community, as well as others, but my first importance is my family. But I'm very angry about the fact that we've been test tubes for America for so long, like the Tuskegee experiment and a lot of other traditions. So I find a problem when people say, you know, and I've heard that over and over again about how people say, don't, you know, be careful of the herbs. And that's a lot of propaganda because I say, to more of a degree, be careful of the drugs that America gives you because of the experiences and the atrocities that have been done to my people as slaves in America. So I say, at the same token, I'm always arguing against, like my professors, you know, I'm doing my master's now, nutrition and food science, I'm always arguing with them. And I can only relate to the ones that are like me, who have known the atrocities and say, you know, we've had a lot of bad, you know, dealings with, you know, the American Medical Association in terms of what they've done and said for us to do, and we've taken their advice, but at the same time, it's done a lot of harm to our people. So I say be careful, again, you know, on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and I think it's an important thing. Yeah, you know, I just want to tell you my own personal story. I consider myself physically pretty healthy, alhamdulillah, and I have been most of my life. And I've had acute illnesses, some pretty acute illnesses, and I've gone through it. But you know, one of the things I attribute my good health to is the fact that I grew up in a home that the only medicine we used was medicine that my grandmother, you know, had learned from her mother and from the mother before her. That's the way I mean, we never even, until I was 25, I'd never taken a pill. I didn't even know how to take a pill. At 25, the age of 25, I was in Berkeley, and I tried taking an aspirin. It was like, how do you do this? I didn't know how. I'd never been to a doctor. I had never been to a medical doctor or a hospital. I didn't even know it. None of my brothers and sisters had. And we'd gone through 4 years of high school, all of us never missing a day of school. You know, so we dealt with things as they came along. And if it got really, we used to get tonsillitis, you know, sometimes we get sore throats, and, you know, we drink honey and lemon. And if the sore throat was really, really bad, and like really strep, the kind of like, he really needs antibiotics right now. No, they didn't even consider that. But they had their method, and you know what it was? It was back to one of my old standbys. My mother would take Vicks and take a cotton swab and reach in there and swab my tonsils with a Vicks. It worked. And I didn't have the, whatever kind of, you know, I didn't, like I said, I didn't know antibiotics. You know, I'm not saying that's, you know, but because I'm not saying, but like I said before, that must be taken in balance with what I said about the man whose life was saved by getting him to the hospital. And there's a time when antibiotics is the rahmah from Allah. I have seen that. when it's the mercy.
What about the climate, though, where you grew up? I mean, you think that has anything to do with it being in California where it's always warm?
Yeah, I grew up at the beach. I think going down to the beach every day helped me a lot. The salt water and the sand and all that, just viewing the sea. Yes?
For the post-traumatic disorder also, I would like to know how you treat them, because I'm very interested in this
I've made some
subject.
reference to that, and it's in
Yeah.
the books, and I haven't talked about that at all. Yeah, yes.
Studying with the Appalachian Institute, the craniosacral therapy that addresses much of that, and I'm intending to follow this direction with somato-emotional release and everything. So that's why I'm really interested in what you have to say about this.
Right, so you're studying with who again? With it?
Appalachian Institute, craniosacral therapy.
Oh, craniosacral therapy, yeah, okay. Now I think people need to know about this, and I think it's really important for the Muslims to know about this therapy and about the concept of somatic therapy, somatic psychotherapy, let's put it that way. Her question was about, she wanted to know a little bit more about post-traumatic stress and how I deal with that, and the kind of therapy that I'm referring to when I talk about trauma therapy. One of the things I refer to, and I'm going to reiterate some of these things, is that trauma is stored in the nervous system, and it's remembered in the nervous system. Okay? That memory in the nervous system is capable of driving and triggering emotional experiences in the emotional body, and thoughts and ideas in turn that we, even from reading, hearing certain things, thought that we have can also in turn trigger in the nervous system stimulation of symptoms of all kinds, okay? So we're talking about 3 levels. Neurological level, as I said yesterday, the reptilian brain, the part of our system which controls our nervous system, the sympathetic, parasympathetic, the autonomic nervous system, our natural inclinations for protection, survival, our respiration, heartbeat, all of these natural things that happen without us thinking about it. The reptilian level. The mammalian part of the brain relates to the emotional body, feelings, affect, tears, happiness, joy, wanting to be held. The emotional part of our being, the mammalian brain, it's really usually referred to. Feelings, emotions, right? Is that clear? Is that a good description? Also, you know what I'm talking about, right? And then the neocortex, the idea, realm of ideas, thought, ideas, ego, principles. And all 3 of these must work together with integrity to be whole. The modern approach to trauma recognizes that something can happen. Post-traumatic stress is a good example. Post-traumatic stress, or let's even take the example of say an automobile accident when you're rear-ended and you get whiplash. Anybody? How many of you have been rear-ended in a car and have had whiplash? In the studies of whiplash, the degree of symptom, the symptom picture, right? The degree of disability that comes from that potentially is so intense in relation to the kind of actual physical impact that it led to this kind of understanding that there's something more at work than just the physical injury. There's a phenomena that's known as the high-rise syndrome. Do you know the high-rise syndrome? The high-rise syndrome is something that people who study, it came out of studies of people, with firefighting techniques and people that have to jump out of high-rise buildings that were on fire, and they were developing methods, what's the best way to catch them? Is it a big net? Is it a big balloon that's blown up with a target? That's one of the ones they came up with, a big balloon with targets, and people would jump out. And they found that there were still a lot of injuries, many injuries people were happening, And in a lot of the studies in films and in the examining what was happening, someone came up and discovered what they call the high-rise syndrome, which was the fact that people who jumped from these buildings were not breaking their limbs, their legs and their arms on the impact with the thing. They were breaking them before they hit the ground. Right? Think of that. It's pretty awesome, isn't it?
How do you do that?
By tensing their muscles and by anticipation, by such tension. Does anybody know that strychnine, the action of strychnine, how it works? Strychnine is a poison that poisons the nervous system, right? Right? It affects the nervous system. But how do anyone know the fact of how most people die when they take strychnine? From the intensity of the contraction of the muscles. Some very often breaking their own back. The human body is capable on both directions of extraordinary things. So trauma, like the rear end, the whiplash, boom, the shock of that, the way the body takes that in, and the way the body can hold that is one of the reasons for the intensity and the chronicity of the injury of whiplash and the response of it. So, and that's because in the nervous system, there is a charge that has to do with that initial shock that does not get discharged. And so it reiterates itself in the musculature, in the emotions, et cetera, over and over and over and over, and then becomes established on all of those levels. It's the great old Hitchcock movies where the person, that you say, bluebell, and they go into this great state of distress because bluebells were present when, some horrible thing happened to them. The trigger thing, or Manchurian Candidate. Or, this is an old, the early, as psychology as it started making its way into the popular mainstream. So, in the shock trauma therapy that I work with, primarily we've come to learn methods by observing animals in nature. Animals in nature can be traumatized very severely and recover very rapidly. But if we observe their recovery, in the process of recovery, they go through very specific actions and processes that can be identified as a release of the trauma from the nervous system. Shaking, trembling, moving of the skin, et cetera, et cetera. Also, trauma can be in respect to unfulfilled actions that are stored in the nervous system, much in the same way that commands are cued in the printer from a computer. I'm sorry I have to use that as a metaphor. I really am sorry, because I'd rather use the human body as a metaphor and other things as metaphors, but that doesn't work. So here's an example of that. Large animals, when they tranquilize large animals to tag them, to put tags, how they do this thing if they want to track where they are and their habits. So they'll tag the polar bear, whatever it is, they'll tranquilize them. So the polar bear is running along, boom, they shoot a tranquilizer. The polar bear goes out, they tag it. The people who work with those animals have learned a principle, which is when the tranquilizer wears off, they must be out of the area of the animal. They must not be. In other words, as the tranquilizer wears off, it's not that they're in danger of being hurt by the animal. They have to be out of the vicinity so the animal is not interrupted in its natural fulfillment of the unfinished actions that they were engaged in. So the polar bear's running, boom, they go out. When that polar bear comes out of the tranquilizer, this is useful information for anesthesiologists, and I think they're aware of it too. The polar bear then goes through the motions, finishes the motions that were there recorded in the nervous system before he comes back to. If he does not do that, and if they don't allow him to do that, or if they interrupt that process, not only will he will not survive. He will not survive. He will not be functionable enough to function as a polar bear and survive following that. That's how extreme it is. So same with us, we have unfulfilled actions. If we do not release them some way, remember I was talking about how the charge up of the nervous system and the release of the nervous system by standing. That is successful discharge of the impulses. So a child is told by the parents, You must do that. And child, they want to do that because they're so frustrated because they're told, don't do this, don't do this. Okay, now if it's a healthy child and they've had the right, holding and touch and all, and they're well grounded, then they'll let that anger and that impulse go. But if they've not been healthy, if been fed on TV and they've been kept from all that's natural and they're living in an unnatural, and they're not grounded and they don't successfully release, then what's going to happen is that impulse for kicking is still going to be there. And so very often what they'll do is, you'll get this. And what is this? This is what they call in trauma work, it's an indication of it's preparatory. It's like they want to kick. And if you work with someone in trauma, I've done this with people in trauma, I say, okay, what do you feel? You'll see the person start doing this. What impulses do you feel? And if you can get them to focus more deeply into the impulse, and they begin to track it, they'll usually track it back here. There's some kind of tightness and tension. Well, and you say, well, what's the impulse feel like? What does your leg want to do? It doesn't want to just do this forever, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. What does it want to do? And if you can really get them to focus into their sensations, back of this thing of grounding oneself in the sensation, you really get them to move to that, they'll say, well, it wants to. I say, why don't you just see if you can just let your leg move the way it wants to move, but do it slowly. And it wants to kick. Because that's a natural defensive. This is another natural. That's another natural one. So all of these impulses, many of us in the trauma we experience, right? It's unfulfilled. So, people who suffer post-traumatic stress, what's happened is the charge of that event is stuck in them. It's stuck in the nervous system. And because of our lifestyle, unlike the animal, unlike the polar bear or the gazelle that gets brought down in the teeth of the lion and then gets up and escapes and is fine after it shakes off, does the things it has to do, unlike them, we have disabled our natural ability to tremble, to release, to ground, etc., by being present in our bodies and release to trauma. So we have to have these extra methods and techniques that can enable us to do it, but we can also develop the ability by being present in our body and sensations to naturally do it on a daily basis. Does that make sense?
Do you think the PTSD might get stuck here, for example?
It's stuck in the entire body, in some sense. But in the traditional point of view, what I was saying is the brain and the mind, but it can be stuck anywhere. It can be stuck anywhere in the body. I tell you, we think with our entire being, with our entire bodies. We think with our hands, or we don't think with our hands. But if we're full human beings, we think with our entire being, and we feel with our entire being. Our brain, where is our brain? Remember when we did this exercise yesterday? There are blind people that have actually, I've heard of blind people that actually learn to sense color differences with their fingertips. Anyone ever heard about that? Our bodies are extraordinary things. I had a friend that used to play music for deaf people. There's a French, there's so much I'd like to talk about and there's not time. Along these lines, Alfred Tomatis, does anyone know his work, Alfred Tomatis? Anybody heard this thing called the Mozart effect? If you listen to Mozart, your brain works better and so forth. That came out of the research of Alfred Tomatis, and Alfred Tomatis demonstrated that our entire body and every pore, all of these pores are ears. We hear with our knuckles, our palms. We hear with every piece of our body. This is the locus and focus for it. But there's a reiterated cycle of sensing, afferent, this feeding in, taking in. There's this constant reiteration of where we are, who we are, what we are, hearing our own sound. When we speak, we hear our sound bounce off the wall, and our body and every pore reacts. It's an amazing, it's all awesome thing. So in the trauma, it can get stuck anywhere, the trauma. It will get stuck in certain parts of the body, but it can be released. So these techniques of working with the nervous system, the primary method that's used is to go in there and meet the nervous system. To meet the nervous system, listen to this, meet the nervous system and to begin to dialogue with it. And how do you meet the nervous system and dialogue with it? Through sensation. Through sensation. What you feel. And the nervous system, our access to the nervous system is through sensation. That's the way it speaks to us, and that's the way we can recognize it and have dialogue with it and track it. So by learning to track, people who do Vipassana meditation, anybody familiar with Vipassana meditation? Vipassana meditation is a kind of yogic, it's a kind of Hindu meditation in which you become very aware of the body and you pay attention to the body and just the experiences that are going on. Some meditative techniques have to do with being aware of the body. Very powerful. A lot of getting in touch with sensation and a lot of grounding happens simply by stopping and meditating. It's been pretty well proven that if a person stops 10, 15 minutes a day and just does nothing, it's a benefit. Yeah.
You said that the trauma is trapped somewhere in your body because it's not being allowed to be released, or you're not being able to finish fulfillment of your task. And I responded to that by saying that Allah says in Quran, retaliation is life. And this is an ayah of Quran. So in that regard, I see a parallel between what you're saying, the proof that you've discovered, and the things that you're saying to that ayah. That it is necessary for a man to have a release for things that traumatize him. And
what you're saying is that in Quran, when Allah indicates that there's appropriate retaliation, yes, I see what you're saying. Yes, that's a.
Because everything that you're saying, and even in the discussions earlier with the doctor there, it seems that everything that you are experiencing and that is being experienced through the research, etc., is proving what Allah is saying. So Hakims, have they ever been termed, a synonymous term for Hakim would be proof, because the physical personage has become an entity that proves the reality of Allah.
I see. Did you all hear that? I mean, have they ever been, as the principles of the Hakims ever been something that say proof of Islam? And I mean, one way of looking at it is this, and I make no claims to hikmah, but I tell you, in the Quran it says, there's ayahs in Quran, the ayahs in Quran say, at one point it says, He, referring to the Prophet, it says, He will purify you. And this is the stages of the process. It says in the Quran, it says, He will purify you, He will teach you the ayahs, right? And purification, that, Allah says in Quran, at other times, Allah says that Allah wants for us purification, and that the salah is purification, the wudu is purification. All of the practices, fasting, all of the things of the practices are for purification. So He says, He will purify you, He will teach you the ayahs. In Quran, yourself and on the horizon, there are ayahs for those, there are signs. He will teach you the signs. And in this case, the ayahs do not mean the ayahs of Quran, it means the ayahs of Allah's creation. He will teach the ayahs. He will teach you the kitab, which then is the Quran. The Quran then is the lens and the guiding piece, the template by which we understand, after the purification, understand the ayahs. Then the kitab, the Quran, gives us the guidance that we need then to interpret that, and the hikmah. So it's that order: purification. And my teacher said this is the way it works. You need all of those pieces. So the hikmah is a kind of a result. It's a result of the purification, understanding the ayahs, using the guidance, should bring the hikmah. And so it should be a proof of it, yes. But all science, every scientist I've ever known, biologist, whatever their field they're engaged in, if they're really awake and they're sensitive people, whether they're Muslim or not, they still use the same thing to describe that if they really go into their science in a genuine and deep way, it brings them back to a recognition and realization of the majesty and the beauty of God. You know, it takes you back to that proof. It comes back to that, and it really emphasizes that and makes it even stronger. So what we should be doing in our science and our understanding is if it's hikmah, yes, it will do that. It will be in line, and that's one of the ways we recognize that it's hikmah, that it's wisdom. This accords. That's why when, you know, I say homeopathy, there's a hikmah in homeopathy. So people say, well, how do I study hikmah? And I say, well, go out and find it wherever it is. Like the writing beast, the lost writing beast. Find it. There's a hikmah in acupuncture. Learn it, understand it, and fit it into the template that you understand as Muslim, as being a Muslim.
It's like one of the last ayat in Surah Al-Baqarah.
Yes.
It's like, it's in the middle of ayah. It says, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ. And like, it's like, if you have taqwa to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like piety, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the knowledge.
Yeah.
All the knowledge that we
Yes.
need.
So he was saying that if you have taqwa, Allah gives you knowledge.
That's for sure.
Yeah. If you have awareness of Allah, if you have, yeah.
I deal with like Reiki, and like people trust me, and they come to me and they ask me, they have like negative energy in.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do a person and they be laying down, it's like I close my eyes and my ears become sight, you know, and I can feel the negative energy from that person and I can pull it out. But I can see this in the darkness with my ears because the ears become my sight. And it's because Allah has blessed me with this, and because I know myself, and because of the love that I have for that person or that trust. And after I do this, this person is healed or feel better. But it's remarkable that we as human beings, Muslim, and Allah bless you when you know yourself, when you know Him, and you trust Him, and He uses you to make another individual feel better. Because it's in everybody, but some people, they won't go that extra mile, they won't get to know their self, and it's very sad because a lot of things heal people. Love, words, reciting of the Quran, many things that heal people, but they don't get to know their self. They trust in the books, you know, which nothing wrong with it, but you still need to know things for your own self.
Alhamdulillah. Yes.
Could you describe some more how you do this dialogue with the body, with the person? For this
Okay, we did some
traumatic-
of it, and maybe this can be one of our little interactive exercises. I mean, the way you begin, here's the way you do the dialogue. It's by, first of all, by observing the felt sense, like we did with the hands. You know, we were right. Do you all remember? Yesterday we did this thing where we put our hands out, and just by doing that, pay attention to your hands. Focus on the hands. Suddenly, your hands. That's not that your hands they do become more stimulated, but it's because of a conscious awareness of it. But you start feeling, well, what are you feeling in your hands? What do you feel in your hands, for example? Can you tell me?
I feel a little tingling.
A little tingling, okay. So that's a very specific sensation. Okay, so you've got a tingling. Okay, now, what do you feel with that tingling if you put your hands so they face each other? What do you feel now?
I actually, when I do this exercise, I feel almost like that repulsion, like you're holding
Yeah.
a balloon.
Like you're holding a balloon,
Feeling
right?
the
Okay,
chi in
anyone else
between.
feel that? Yeah. And that is a common sensation. And it's generally understood because it actually is sensing a reality. The reality is that the body is emanating at all times. It's emanating not just frequency or energy from the nervous system, it's emanating fumes that keep our body from becoming infected. You know, the cadaver goes infected like that because it doesn't have the natural protection that's coming out from our skin all the time, which we call sweat if it turns into, you know, there's enough of it so it has moisture. But it's coming out all the time, fumes. The Hakims recognized it and talked about the fumes that emanate from the body. People that are sensitive feel those fumes, smell them, taste them and know the difference between this person's fumes and that one. They know when a person's sick because you can smell it coming out of them. And you know what kind of disturbance they have. Pheromones we know about. That's a scientific one, the pheromones. The ones that come out from here. From the women more than the men, pheromones. The women send their pheromones into the air. So this is the beginning of a dialogue. We're tuning into the felt sense, and then we're beginning to track. You feel tingling like this. You feel like a balloon like that. Okay? So the dialogue begins by simply becoming aware of it. Like I said yesterday, I love to touch one hair on the tip of the tail of my cat. Because when I do it, boom, one hair, boom, boom, her tail, her whole skin, the whole thing, her whole body responds. And I teach my kids that. I say, look, touch one hair on your leg. How, are you touching my leg? You know what I mean? You can be more or less sensitive. But we can regain this. So little children are very much in their bodies, and this is very much alive. And we lose it. So let's continue this. So think of a time recently when you really felt most like yourself. Can you think of a time? A specific time? How long ago was it? When was it? Oh, it was on the Hajj, okay. Can you think of one particular day and a particular moment? A specific time. Can you do that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so as you do that, what do you notice in your body? What sensations where?
Warmth in the chest area.
Warmth in the chest. Okay, now just observe that. Observe it. Warmth in the chest. That's a pretty expected sensation. But it's something that happens and we say, yeah, as I remember that, it gives me a warm feeling. But we don't necessarily tune into the actual physical sensation. Okay, now can you think of a time when you had a really difficult experience with somebody, a particular person that, they're really troublesome? Can you think of that? Yeah? How long ago? More or less.
A couple of years ago.
Oh, a couple of years. It's been that long, huh? Wow. That's pretty good. Sounds like you're in good harmony or something. That's a long time. Okay, can you remember the actual day and the event? Mm-hmm. Okay, and as you recall that day and event, what do you notice in your body?
It's lower. It's a heaviness in kind of the gut, the stomach.
Right. Because as you recall and as you live and as you experience, we all feel, to more or less. I mean, again, we can shut these things down, but we feel these things. We live with things, we're feeling creatures. We're supposed to be. So the dialogue, again, with someone who works with the trauma, they facilitate the person to contact through the felt sense, the nervous system, and then learn particular methods by which you can make and bring about that which the animal naturally does, which is discharge the charge. Now, these charges can be pretty intense. A small child that witnesses their parents fighting, right? 3-year-old child, 4-year-old child, witnesses the parents fighting. That child can, in their nervous system, the part of their being that wants to protect and is concerned on an unconscious level with their own survival, that child can feel threatened. Their life can feel threatened because the two most important pieces of their sustenance and existence are in conflict. And that can be so dramatic that they actually feel threatened on some level, but the charge can be enormous. Now, if the parents, they go on with their business, they don't address what happened, they don't recognize the intensity of that charge. Or if the child's so ungrounded, I like to stand up when I say ungrounded, they're so ungrounded, they're not able to discharge that charge. They're not able to go, Mommy, Daddy, what's wrong? Why? Release it effectively, and that doesn't mean just crying. Crying may not effectively release it, although that's one of the ways children do it. They release their charges. They release the charges because they're not taught the whole, at early age they're given the permission to cry. It's okay to cry up to a point. But then the parents start saying, stop crying or don't crying. A lot of start shutting that down. But so the child then has this charge, You know, and that charge can be so intense. So as they grow up, they have a charge that's way out of proportion to what happened. It was just one day they had an argument. That charge can be so great that the child then needs to find some narrative appropriate to the intensity of charge that's there. And that's why some very little events that happen to people can really be very big traumas, and we don't understand it, but it's only because the natural release and charge, the rising of the sun, the setting of all that the natural discharge and release has not been affected. Does that make sense? It's interesting, isn't it? Well, it's interesting when you see it at work. When you see it work with clients and you see people releasing old charge. It's interesting to see, for example, there's exercises in trauma therapy in which you can stimulate what's called the vestibular memory. That is the memory that's lodged in the vestibular, the nervous system as relates to the vestibular mechanism, the nervous system, what can be recorded in there. I have seen people, when you stimulate their vestibular memory, who can recount, they'll suddenly go into a state and they say, what's happening? What do you feel? And they say, I feel nauseous. And I say, well, what does it feel like you're doing? And they say, oh, I'm falling. I said, and they said, it was when I fell off my bike, I fell, and they start going through what happened to them when they were 6 years old, falling off their bike, and they go, and you keep them slow down your movement, they stay with it slow, and they say, yeah, the ground's coming up, oh, and I'm hitting the ground, oh, and my face, oh, and my teeth hit the bars, and they're reliving this event. And what's happening in the reliving of it is actually it's releasing from their nervous system a whole intensing, that happened that they've carried with them since the age of 6 and carried with them in their posture and managed to live with it, but still to some degree it's a yoke. That when it's released, they suddenly feel, so this person who is extremely rigid suddenly becomes a little more relaxed. It's pretty awesome. And there's a hikmah in it, you see, what I see. In other words, what I see, I don't see anything that offends the principles that I understand of how we're created and what Allah says in His book and His guidance. Yeah.
So when you first learned this, did you spend a lot of time with yourself just looking inside and testing it all out?
Well, part of learning it is you go through you do a lot of it yourself. Yeah, and like I said, the primary thing that happened to me was it was a proof of the hadith that when you make dua for other people, the angels make dua for you and say to them, and realizing that I wanted to help these traumatized people and discovered, wait, I'm the traumatized person. Now, even more coincidental to that, and this thing of the synchronicity of Allah's creation, is that I finally decided I must learn this, and the man that was treating me started to teach me and said, well, you should study it, and we have a training, and you can start your training. The first year begins in California in such and such a place. And I said, well, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to start this training. And so I traveled from New Mexico to the Bay Area to it was near the Haight-Ashbury section, like by the hospital area a little bit. And I traveled to this place, and the third day of the training, some of the training happens with videotapes. We're watching a videotape. This is in the Haight-Ashbury. It's a sunny Sunday morning. We're watching a videotape, and it's a videotape about a woman who had been beaten by a man by the rifle butt in the forest. Her husband was at the cabin where they were staying, and he saw something happen. He thought the man was chopping wood. Astaghfirullah. Right? But he was like beating his wife. This was a man beating his wife with a rifle. I observed this, and as I'm observing this is a case study, so we could begin to learn on how then she was able to release the trauma from that experience. As I'm watching this, I suddenly get this incredible headache, pain on the side of my head, and as I experience this pain on the side of my head, I realized, I stopped for a moment, sunny Sunday morning, turned from where I'm watching this videotape to look out the window and remember that 25 years earlier, I was on the street and I could see the spot where I had been beaten in the head by 3 men who tried to kill me with iron bars. So that was this, I'm just bringing this up as my own personal awesome kind of synchronous story in this experience, but it's very much, Allah's creation is that way anyway. But here I had gone all these years, looked for healing for trauma, discovered I was traumatized myself, went back to learn it at the beginning, and not only went back for the first lesson, went back to get the first lesson where I had been traumatized myself and forgotten about, or not, had discounted that, oh yeah, that if something had happened to me, but I didn't recognize the degree to which it had impacted me. So I know, alhamdulillah, that was that's the rahmah. To me, that was the rahmah of all of it in action, and the proof that Allah has this incredible pattern and design for us. Yeah. Sorry.
Working with trauma. Does a person have to become aware and present to actual events and allow themselves to be with God in the memory of that event? Or is it also possible to truly heal trauma without being conscious and present in the memory, but present with God?
I think so. I think Allah is the one that heals trauma. And again, if you successfully and completely release the charge, and that's why the exercise we were doing, that is, it's expressing, and some people do dhikr. You're familiar with it. Some of you, anybody not familiar with the dhikr, the hadra? It's remembering Allah or calling on Allah by various names. Allah or Al-Hayyu, or, when that's done with the entire being, from the bottoms of feet, that's part of the point. The whole system takes part of it. It is a beautiful trauma therapy. And all of the study one makes of the trauma therapy points to the effectiveness of this practice, in fact. So yes, and it's also possible for Allah to heal it without you even realizing it. But Allah's mercy also comes in the form of therapies, and learning that contains, that happens to us with these pieces of, like I say, tracking, felt sense. But tracking the felt sense can also make your dhikr stronger. Can make your recitation of Quran so much more too. If you learn how to stand, like I was saying, and you practice this, after a while, you can find that your standing becomes a much more, that's part of our practice. Part of our practice of acceptance and submission to Allah is simply standing. Not doing anything but stand. That is a part, but to really fully experience that. Not to be caught up in an idea of it, or to be distracted and thinking about something completely different, to be really totally present in that. I say to people that you probably could release trauma if you really fully and completely experience the act of making 2 or 3 steps. Really fully experience what that is, the whole process of it, of the nervous system, because it's a very complex, beautiful action. And in that action is contained the recognition, really, if you're aware of it, of the beauty of Allah's creation. It contains hamd, shukr, it contains all of these things that in fact can be spiritual healing, but physiological healing as well. So absolutely, you can release it all kinds of ways. And it's Allah's business. Allah is the healer. I love the story about the man who, he was blind and he got struck by lightning and he could see. That happened somewhere. You read these things in the newspaper, but Allah, it happens all the time.
It depends on, to get healed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to actually, identify something that, to reach the point that He heal us, which is the mercy and the rahmah. But to reach this point, we should have the hikmah that what we should do, what we actually present, was it the sacrifice that we do, so we get that heal. That's the whole main point. We have to sacrifice somehow. That's how.
You're saying that we have to sacrifice to be healed. Allah is generous. Allah is the healer. He decides how we heal, whether, when we do, how, when. It's Allah's business. We ask Him. There's nothing wrong with asking. Allah, heal me. And it's up to Him whether He does or not. It's not by our actions. Not by our actions. It's not because we do something right or sacrifice or don't do this or don't. No, it's by Allah's mercy alone.
What I'm saying is, like, there is a story, like there is a great actually hadith that there is like one of the big ulama, like I think it was Malki or Shafi'i, Malki or Abu Hanbal. He was very fast in memorizing 2 pages at once. And then he went to the market and he looked at, like a lady, he looked at just at her shoes. And then what happened that he went to his teacher and he told him, I can't memorize anything at all. So he's like, what, like, I mean, you did something wrong. So he recalled that he went to the market and he looked at this. So this was a sin. So when he went back to his teacher, he told him, yes, I did this. He said, yes, make tawbah, 2 rak'ah, like, and do repentance about what he did. And then he started to recall that, and then he did that. He did the repentance to God, you know?
Yes.
And then after that, he started to memorize things again.
Yes. Okay, did you all hear that? That a man, one of the scholars performed the wrong action and Allah gave him a debility, so his teacher said, and so he determined. But we do not get healing from Allah because of our actions. It's only by the grace of Allah that it's His business whether we do or not. So we ask Him. He is the one who heals. That doesn't mean we're not obliged to do the best we can in terms of correcting our actions and having good action. But we don't believe that. We don't believe that our healing or the benefit we get of Allah is dependent totally on our actions. It's totally on it, because the Prophet ﷺ said too that, if we were dependent on Jannah from our actions, none of us would be there. It's by the rahmah of Allah. And there's the man that he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said he was in Jannah not because of anything he did, because he did this and this and this, but he was there only because he believed in the rahmah of Allah. His rahmah is greater and it precedes his wrath, and it's the thing that precedes all.
Kun fayakun, be, and it is. And I think that we have to always remember that Allah says He created men and jinn to worship Him. So all of this, the intention, moving in the direction of what you want, moving to live a healthy lifestyle, to love people, to help, to practice Quran, to follow the Sunnah, is all a part of this medicine, is all a part of worshiping Allah. So, in Quran Allah says, you so well-pleasing and well-pleased. But what does that mean? Well-pleasing, that we've done the work that we're supposed to be here to do, and so that Allah is pleased with us, and we're pleased with Him, and being pleased with Him. What does that mean? That we accept, we submit, we use what He's giving us, be it whatever knowledge we have, or whatever sincerity we have, all of those things, because that's, we're here to work. We're here to work for Allah. He doesn't need anything from us, but we need from Him. But I think that, one of my doctors and one of my teachers used to say, don't think too deeply. And for the longest time, I couldn't understand what that meant, because I said, well, that's what we're supposed to do, think. But there's a balance. We were talking about the scholars earlier. You can get so deep in the thought that you forget the rahmah, you forget to see, what Allah is telling you. You forget to hear, because you get lost in your own self. And that's, why we try to keep the balance. That's why we walk this path. That's why we do these things, inshallah. Allah knows the best.
That's part of being insan. Like the word insan, in Arabic, it came from someone who forgot. Like this word meaning insan who forgot. So we always try to remember who we are, where we're going, and what's going to happen. Because what happened, like the whole meeting or the whole gathering, that we know that this sign of natural health in Islamic tradition, like the first thing that like Dr. Hakim said, that the existence of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was the healing. So now we don't have the Prophet. So what happened is that we, like as Muslims or non-Muslims, we migrated from knowing God. I'm not talking about us, but in general. So that's why there is a lot of disease, whether it is psychologically, chronically, or whatever. Like the companion of the Prophet, they used to be with him every second. They used to know what he's saying. They used to actually digest and ask him. They don't just listen, they ask and they argue and they listen and they do discussion with him. So and then they went to the point that they believed in heaven and hell. So actually they saw heaven and they saw hell because he was telling them about hell and heaven. So what happened that they went to the point that they got elevated spiritually. And that elevation caused them actually all the progress that they did. So this is the point that we are missing. We are missing the true belief in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So if we do have that, we have the key to paradise and the key to actually, success.
Inshallah.
That's all.
Inshallah. So we need to wrap this up, and we need to get into this last section, which, what the brother asked me to do was to sort of come to this point. How do we implement what we've been talking about here? And what I want to focus on as a kind of closing piece is the recognition of where we're at, and here I want to give a little example here, a metaphor. If we're in a house and the roof has blown off, we can be concerned with the food and the cooking and what's on the shelf, etc., but we've got to fix the roof before we do anything, right? Someone said that, the one with the hikmah is the one that when there's fire, they bring water to put the fire out first, etc. If the patient's bleeding, stop the bleeding before you do anything else and then deal with the next pieces. So what I'm saying is, and the reason I bring this up is that we have to, and this is one of the basic principles of the hikmah, is understanding what is our nature, because one of the principles is we cannot know what health and wholeness is unless we know what the nature of the human being is. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was our model. And we have that as a gift to see, okay, this is what it was. So this is the picture, and then we learn from that. Now what's way out of balance? What's most out of balance? How close are we to that and how far away are we from it? If we're seriously way out of balance, and that's what I'm suggesting, and that's one of the things I've been trying to underline in these last 2 days, is underlining a way in which we recognize just how deeply out of balance we are, but recognize it in a way that we've kind of overlooked. It's like I said, the time we spent reflecting on our postures, on that alone, and how our lifestyle has created our inability to be present, breathing, and present in our bodies, to recognize how our lifestyle and the comforts, so-called comforts, that have absented us from connecting to our physical bodies and to the earth, how much that has debilitated us and how much of an obstacle that is to us just simply being as we were designed, and recognizing and connecting to how we were designed, recognition of how we were designed by Allah, so that we can be like the Prophet ﷺ, and that he was pure in that sense. So we have to realize, this idea of flicking on a light switch and having lights and flicking it off when you don't have lights, we don't grasp what that has done to us. To have a refrigerator that cools things, and it seems to be like this great gift. Like I said before, it's a gift that keeps food from spoiling, but it also, has taken away from us those very foods that in their spoiling have given us nourishment and benefit. Yogurt and pickles and, the fermented foods, and do you know what I'm saying? It's taken away from us the abundance, the overabundance, to the point of it being, that enables us to throw away parts of an animal that we kill and not use them in cooking and not reuse them by boiling the bones, etc., and getting the nutrition out of it. All of these things, all of the things that appear to benefit us, we have to take a second look at and see, have they benefited us or not? I remember a day in Southern California where I was reflecting on all of this, and I remember I had to leave Southern California and go to Northern California. And there's that section in northern, just as you're leaving Los Angeles, they call it, it's that very steep incline. What is it called? That, the what? The Grapevine, right. You know that place? It's like lanes and lanes and lanes and lanes of asphalt, right? And it's, a part of it just goes straight up. And I remember being there and like, you know, my particular car, I had to really try to keep up with everybody. And I looked around me and I thought, subhanAllah, what are we doing here? And I saw everybody else is like this. And I suddenly had this insight of the insanity of it. Has anyone else had this sort of insight that it's like totally crazy what we're doing? I hope you have. And that doesn't mean I don't appreciate a good car and can ride in it and all, and make it. Actually, I don't make an effort to get a good car, but I'm changing. I'm going to make an effort to get a nice car that's comfortable instead of a New Mexican truck. But I consider it important kind of grasp of reality to see how crazy it is to do that. I consider it an important piece of reality to see how crazy it is to get in your car and commute every day. And people say, well, yeah, I have to commute every day. It's only 45 minutes each way. You know, it's not a little thing. The things that I referred to about how we live disconnected, these are not little things. I really want you to inshallah, if anything else, I want you to really think about these things. And to recognize that I'm not saying, okay, it's all wrong and move out to the country. Yeah, you can do that, great. But understand it. Understand it, and understand it, how we're debilitated and how our nervous system really needs connection with the earth. Walk barefoot. I've told people to do that all the time. When you can. Pray on the ground when you can pray on the ground. Go out in the morning and listen to the birds, even in the city. This morning we walked out and we heard the birds before the sounds of the traffic drowned them out and they went somewhere else. And they were beautiful. You know, in other words, find the strategies to recognize what fulfills you and what benefits you, what nourishes you, and make use of them. And I say one of the most nourishing things, back to what the Prophet ﷺ was said, you know, the best dish is the one with the most hands in it. That which will nourish us most, back to what, I didn't put Dean Ornish's book on my book list, but I should have. I just flipped my mind, I would have put it on there. Love and Survival, the one that the author referred to. That's a good book, Love and Survival, Dean Ornish. But, you know, remembering what he said, that, and what the Prophet, reiterating what the truth of the Prophet, the best dish is the one with the most hands in it. Connecting with each other. Hug your children. Hug your spouse. Hug your brother, your sister. Be with them. Walk with them. Try walking hand in hand with somebody. Try it. If you like the person, if you really like them, recognize it feels good to walk hand in hand. Invite people into your homes. Invite people into your homes. Feed people, feed people, feed people. If you can't make good food, find someone that can make good food and teach you how to make good food. Or get someone that makes really good food and invite strangers into your house. Invite neighbors. Invite people that you first met. Invite someone you want to know. This is a jihad against the conspiracy of conditions in which we find ourselves for not just survival, not just for good health, but survival. It's survival. Because together is the way we do something. We can look at all of the wrongs and all of the faults and all of the things that don't work. And we can say, this doesn't work. And we can use our intellect and say, oh yeah, this is why and that's why. And we can write books about this is why and that's why. But we are the ones that will do something about it. It's not somebody else. It's not some sheikh or some teacher or somebody that's going to come and lift us out of this. That does not mean we don't make use of those people of knowledge and people with barakah. But we have to do the work of being human, being Muslim, and following the guidance of the Prophet, and be like him. Change the world. We have to be the ones to do it. And we'll do it not individually, we'll do it by supporting each other, by touching each other. I mean touching in the sense of brotherhood and sisterhood, of touching in that sense. And physically touching in some cases too, but being together. So, if nothing else, I want to leave you with how do we implement these things in our daily life? It's following the Sunnah. That is, be generous. Be generous to people. You remember the story, the hadith and the story of the prostitute that came to the Prophet ﷺ. She came to him and he said to her, have you come to me to ply your wares? Or have you come to make shahada and become Muslim? And she said, neither one. I've come because I hear you're a generous person. And he gave her his cloak. And he said to his companions, and the people said, give to this woman. Show your generosity. That's who he was. He went to the Jewish woman, who put the trash in front of his door every day. When the trash wasn't there, he went to see if she was all right because she was sick. I mean, hello, this is what it's about. People out there are hurting. We're hurting too. We're not the only ones. There are people in pain, and lots of pain and suffering. And I tell you, we cannot do it alone. We do things together. We do things together. Islam believes in shura. It believes in community. The brick, in the hadith, the believers are like bricks in a building, but we must come together. It must be actual physically coming together. That's why the prayer, our salah is real. It's shoulder to shoulder. Touching each other. Boom, touching each other. Ranks. It's coming together. Now my sheikh, he said, feed people. And that's what he did. And that's one of the practices I've taken on myself, is feeding people. I mean, there was a period of time in my life when there were several years, and every 2 weeks I'd feed at least 35 or 40 people. Most of them non-Muslims, and most of them young people that were friends of my children who heard I'd made really good couscous and biryani and things like that, and they'd come and I'd make lots of really tasty things, and they'd come back for the food, and I'd say to them, look, I'm doing this and asking you to come here, and the reason this event happens is simply so we eat together and we associate rather than dissociate. It's not come to get high, right, or play music. And they understood it. They said, right, we get it, right. And they'd come back. And then they'd bring their friends. And they'd bring more friends, and then other friends. And some would come and leave. And the interesting thing is, in terms of dawah, the point of that was not dawah. My sheikh said, don't make dawah to people, feed them. In other words, be a Muslim. Don't try to convince someone they should become Muslim. Be Muslim. That's dawah. He said, feed people. And after 9/11, 9 of those people, one by one, came to me and said, after 9/11, they came and they called me before the dinner and they say, I'm coming to your dinner on Sunday, but could I come a little earlier? I wanted to sit and talk with you about something. And I knew what they were going to come and talk about. But no one ever said, oh, Islam is this or not that. All they did was come and they ate. So, but we have to work against this conspiracy of time and schedule and dissociation, what they call anomie in sociology, this isolation of individuals, the lone gunman. How many people could be healed just by simply being able to sit in a circle of people and have the company, and to be heard by them, to speak to them, and to hear them. Do you know what happens in that exchange? Remember I was saying that the body is ears. When we speak and when we exchange the voices, the sound of our voices, what happens to the nervous system is enormous. It's not a little event.
جعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل تتعارفوا. Was it in the Quran that we created you as mankind from different tribes?
That you should know one another. Exactly, that we should know one another. How do we do that? Someone asked the Prophet ﷺ asked someone and said, do you know this person? And he said, how do I determine where I know this person? You travel with him? You eat with him? What are the other things? What? You spend time in their home, I believe, right? Isn't that it? Huh? yeah, not
Camp
camping or something like that. When you're
Yeah.
traveling with them, you sleep. in
You
the same
spend
hotel.
time in their home. You live with them, or you be in their home. Yeah. So the point I hear.
Disagree about something. You might clarify for me much better about that.
Pardon me?
Sorry about interrupting you. You might clarify something for me much better. I disagree about something.
Yes.
How we can live the life of someone without having his mentality. I mean, how we can live the life of the Prophet without having the fikr.
The Prophet ﷺ said each one of you has a degree of prophecy, and he is the model for us. In other words, we aspire to be as him. Now, let me tell you something. When I was in, listen for just a moment. When I was in LA, remember the Deen Intensive in the mountains in LA? I had a really interesting insight there. Do you remember that Deen Intensive? Of course. It was a wonderful time, huh? In that Deen Intensive, someone was giving a discussion and talking about the Prophet ﷺ, and he mentioned, they were talking about the nature of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, you know, that he was the person who, when he was alone, he was grave. And when he was with people, he smiled. And you know, when he said that, everyone in that room wept. Do you remember that? Everyone, it's like, and it occurred to me, and I thought, why is everyone weeping? Why does everyone move so much by this person, this man that lived 1400 years ago? And how is it that everybody, when they hear this simple thing about him being grave and smiling, that it moves them to tears? What's going on there? And I reflected on that for a while, and I realized that somehow we responded, every one of us. I did too. Do you remember that day? I don't remember who it was that said that, but do you remember the event? You may, I don't know what you do. I was moved by it, but I know everybody in the room wept. But I realized that I wept and I was moved by it because I recognized the truth of it as what that means in terms of the being and attitude, if you want to use that term, that who he was and what that meant in terms of beingness. And when I reflected on it, I realized we recognize that because we have a degree of that. We've done that ourselves. We know what that means to be grave on ourselves and serious when we're inward and when we're alone, and to be generous enough to give out to people. We've experienced that. The point being, just hang on, just relax. Take a full deep breath. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. The point being that the Prophet was a model for us. We can be like him. Of course we can. That's why Allah sent him. He was our messenger embodied. This is what we want to emulate. He was generous. We must be generous. And we don't do it by intellect alone. We do it by more than that. Do you remember he has the hadith? He says, I weep for my brothers. And the companion said, are you not my brothers? And he said, no, you are my companions. My brothers are the ones that will come years and years and years after me and will weep and will know me even though they've never even lived in my time.
So, what I'm saying is that there's a hadith says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, he was crying.
Yes.
When there was someone Jewish who was dying. So, I mean, they saw him crying, but they didn't sit down, they asked him, why you were crying? So he replied, he said that because he didn't get the guidance. He died without saying, there is God. He believed in God.
Yes.
At the same time, all his grief was about the mankind, how the mankind can get the guidance from Allah, how the mankind, what they should do, that they believe in God, they believe in Allah. So that's why he was grieving. At the same time, which is the most major point, that before he died, he was smiling when he saw one of the companion, Umar radiallahu anhu, he was praying with the Muslims. So he smiled because they are praying. And he said 3 times before he died to the nation, Liyawma atmamtu lakum dinakum, and Salah, 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 that he told us about the Salah. I mean, how we can get healed without making Salah? That's my whole point is.
Yeah. Well, I think we've made a point. I've tried to make clear that the deen. Someone said, I think we've made clear. I hope we've made clear that the medicine of the Prophet was Islam. That's the medicine of the Prophet ﷺ. That is what he brought in all of its aspects. But we must look into it and understand it to see how it's medicine and to see how we apply it to ourselves, practically speaking, how we make use of it, so that it's not an idea, so that we actually implement it and put it to use and make use of it. I've tried to give some guidance as to how that happens. How many people stand in prayer and they go through some motions and they're thinking about something, you know, that the famous story of Rumi. I like to tell it and retell it because it's so, the man is standing in the salat and he says, oh, I forgot to take care of my such and such at home. And the man says, next to him says, you fool, you just broke your salah. You're not supposed to talk in salat. And the third man's thinking, they're both stupid. That guy broke his salat too. So, you know, the point being, we can be present or not present in our salat. You know, I'm talking a lot here about, okay, how do we do this? You know, really, if we can implement some of the things I'm talking about here, the salat becomes stronger. The wudu itself is an awesome thing to happen. Yes?
Yeah, from your experience working with young Muslim Americans, what are we doing right and wrong? I mean, young Muslim Americans, as in the ones that come to events like this, or Deen Intensives, or whatever, it's only like 20% or something. What's your analysis?
Wow, that's in 4 minutes to answer.
Is it Puritan or a cold and dry or earthy?
Yeah, you know, I mean, what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong? But particularly in terms of the youth, the young people. You know, Islam is something that Allah is in charge of. It's His deen. And He has brought it to this country, and He will care for it. I mean, as much as we can look at and criticize and we say, we need to do this and we need to do that. Yes, but we can make presumption in terms of understanding what we need and what we don't need, because in fact, it is designed by Him, by Allah, to be the last guidance on the planet. And I promise you, wallahi, we haven't seen anything yet in terms of Islam in this country, in terms of its important piece of the drama as the story of this nation unfolds. And the young people are doing what they will do. You know, they're looking for guidance, and most of the adults many of them just don't have a clue about what they need to do with the young people, which is listen to them. Just like I said earlier, men need to listen to their wives, listen. Parents need to listen to their children. But this story will unfold, and it will have all sorts of terrible things that happen in it, and all sorts of good things, and it'll be an incredible mix. But it will inevitably, by Allah, because it is the last teaching, it will inevitably be an important piece in the story as it unfolds, more so than we realize right now, I would suggest. I mean, Allahu Alam, I don't know this, but I know it's the case. So right now the young people are struggling with it, but there's a lot of new vitality. Something I noticed many years ago when I was in England amongst the Muslims. There was a time when I lived in England and you could hardly find any Muslims around. I remember being on a street in Edgware Road near Maida Vale with Colonel Muhammad Atul Rahim. Does anybody know who he was? He was just one of my dearest teachers. He wrote a book called Jesus, Prophet of Islam. He was a colonel from Pakistan. We never sat with him, but we had tears. And we sat in his apartment on Edgware Road, and it was English. You know, there were, sausage shops and all that. And he said, Allah, bring Islam to this place and all that. And, anybody been to Edgware Road recently? What's Edgware Road like now? It's all Muslim. Even the street signs are in Arabic. And I look at it and I think, is this for real? Is this real? So, Allahu Alam, I mean, Islam, when it is the last deen, so there may be times, one of the difficulty things that may happen is it may be hard to find. It may take all sorts of different shapes. But the young people, I feel for them and I respect the young people because they have an honesty and a sincerity and they demand, they have what I call really high level BS meters. And it's the BS meter, you can see their meters are in their eyes. They hear someone is talking, you know, they hear someone says, well, we must do that, blah, 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 and they go. So we need to respect them, you know, and we don't. We don't know how to respect them quite. We need to learn how to respect young people and engage them. And we need to see also that there's a design. One of the conspiracies is to create this thing called a teenager, which is a lie. You know, it's a marketing strategy to create the teenager. And the marketers say, okay, the teenager now must be, you know, go from the age of 13 to 33. You know, that's the target audience. And, you know, and the teenagers believe it, and the adults believe it. Oh yeah, they're teenagers, so they're this separate. They have different clothing, they have different music. They're like different creatures, you know. And so we have to find a way to like see beyond that. And, you know, wait a minute, this is not true. You know, my children, I treat them as adults when they're adults. I treat them with respect as human beings, and I respect what they have to say, what they feel and what they say. They may not have the solutions for many things, but they do have the eyes to see that are really good, and we need those eyes. And they have the sensitivity and the idealism that we need to connect to and respect and gain from to support our own, you know, 13-year-old idealist that's inside, that remains inside us, inshallah. So, inshallah, Allah, you know, I ask Allah that He bless this gathering. I ask you all to forgive me if I've done anything that's out of line and said anything that's overstepped boundaries that I should have. Forgive me for anything in respect to that. I ask Allah that He bless this gathering, that He give us knowledge, that He give us courage and He give us strength to become strong Muslims, human beings, that He give us the knowledge and the wisdom we need to draw close to each other, to draw close to ourselves, to draw close to Him, and to have the courage to recognize that we can change ourselves and we can change the things around us, that there is a healing, that part of His mercy, that we see and connect and believe and recognize that His mercy is that He is the healer and He can heal whatever, and that He give us the juice we need to proceed on that way with delight and with goodness and with joy and with love between ourselves, and that He protect our children, inshallah, and that He protect our animals and our trees and our stones and our grass and our creation, and that He enable us to see the way we bring things back to some semblance of beauty that He's designed, and that we find a way to avoid the desecration that's taking place, inshallah. That He give us respect between each other, that we learn how to respect people appropriately. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Alhamdulillah. Thank you all so much for your really beautiful attention, so much. I really appreciate the strength of intensity, and really, I could tell people's ears and hearts are open. I could see it and feel it.